thank you for being here today. I thank our Sheikha for inviting me and giving her encouragement. It's been absolutely invaluable to have the encouragement and opening of space for to invite me here and bring me here. So thank our Sheikha for that. And Dr. Taslima from Las Vegas, New Mexico with me for holding the tradition there and supporting me and helping me there. So very grateful to have all these people come together to help me be here tonight with you. I'll be describing with a 6-year project in Inshallah to create the first translation of Ibn Arabi's Futuhat al-Makkiya. It's never been fully translated. It's very the question is actually, can it be translated? And so it's, in a way, I always say it's the holy grail of translations. Can anyone translate the Futuhat? That's the big question. We go to the next slide. In fact, Peter Press has already given one of the scholars in the Meccan Revelations, and I talked to them and I understand why they say this, that this is a project that it could be generations long. And it's not just because the text itself is 10,000 pages, although that certainly 10,000 pages is a big thing to do. It also, the main scholarly description of the obstacle for translation of the Futuhat is that it requires this philosophical hermeneutics. It requires its own language to describe what's happening. Now, and here's where I have a different take. This may be true, I think, for the Fusus. It's probably true for Qutb al-Qulub. So many of the classical Islamic texts, I do think they need to have philosophical hermeneutics behind it before it can be understood and translated. The Futuhat is different, though, and the reason I think it's different is that on chapter 1, Ibn Arabi describes his vision, and he says, "I'm going to now tell you what I saw." And so when you describe something you've seen, you don't really use, Greek hermeneutics and Latin ideas or classical Arabic or philosophical Arabic or even Sufi terminology. You use every terminology to describe what I saw. You say, it was big. Big isn't a special word. It just means it was big. We all know what big is. And so if it's true that the vision of the Futuhat al-Makkiya is a visual vision, something he saw, and if it's true that he describes it and wants us to understand it, then the translation will be possible. It may take 6 years, it may take longer, but it will be possible. And in every page he says, learn this, and he says, may God give you a spirit to assist you, and may we all be guided to understand this. So he wants us to understand. And he speaks in the second person singular. He says, you. He's reading directly to us. He wants us to understand. So with this encouragement from the Sheikh, we move on to, let's try to understand this text and translate it. The next slide is, of course, there's his tomb in Damascus. And this is the beginning of the Futuhat, which is the khutbah of the Futuhat. And we'll be talking a little bit about that line. But notice the first line, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad. And then, Alhamdulillah, alladhi awjada shay'an. So we'll look at that line in just a minute. Now there are 3 manuscripts that are autographed manuscripts that either he wrote parts of it, or he was there and wrote at the end of the section saying, I am here, and this was read before this person, this person, this person, in this person's house. And it is what the text is. So he has verified or written all of the Futuhat al-Makkiya in 3 different manuscripts that we have today. When we think about most philosophers, most Sufis, most Western philosophers, anyone from this period, 14th century, 13th century, we don't know what they wrote. We don't know if what is attributed to them is what they really did write. Here we have 3 handwritten manuscripts. We know exactly what Ibn Arabi wrote. It speaks to us after 800 years in a very physical transmission that we have this text in front of us, and then of course in the universalist soul and heart transmission that we know this is coming directly from him. Now we've relied, as scholars, we've read the 4 volumes of the Bulaq edition that comes from Egypt, and these 4 volumes are very dense, very hard to read. They have their own beauty, and I was kind of grew up with it, so it does feel good, but it is dense, and it is in some way. Stephen Hurtgenstein said, "Why would you want to translate using this one? It's worded." And I said, well, it's something, but this is the original one with the worms up there, which gave it the good quality. Next slide is this is the incomplete critical edition that Osman Yahya put together. Osman Yahya did a wonderful job. He was in the Sorbonne. He got to 14 volumes, or 14 books out of 37 before he died. So he was not able to complete, but his text is beautifully done as a critical edition. There are some, we have some criticisms of the critical edition. I've written an article about them, but these are perhaps nitpicking, and criticism that he spent too much time doing things that we wish if he didn't spend so much time doing that, he might have gotten a few more volumes done. But all in all, wonderful effort, very clear, very easy to read. Next one. And now, the one that I've been using and one of the impetuses, or impetai, I think that was, of my translation effort was Dr. Mansoub. And that beret just tells me who he is. He's a wonderful man, very gentle person. He comes from Sana'a, Yemen. I write to him in English. He writes back to me in Arabic. We get along, I think, really well. I enjoy hearing from him. He's helped me often when I get into difficulties. He comes back, and for him it's as easy as can be. He spent 11 years with the 3 manuscripts, and after 11 years, he was able to create the first complete critical edition of the Futuhat makkiya in 12 volumes. And in a sense, honoring his critical edition, I'm hoping, and the thought is that the translation will also have 12 volumes. It will come out, will parallel his critical edition, so that the person who wants to dig deeper into some of these ideas will be able to have quick and good access to the critical edition. It's very hard to find this right now. In fact, it was Stephen Hurtgenstein who said, told me more about it, and said, this is the person who's done it. When I wrote to him, I said, your edition is very hard to find. What can I do about that? He says, what's your address? He sent me the 12 volumes. And so I said, this means that I better start working. So this one's gotten kind of beaten up, as you can see, and they're cleaner. I'm right around here in 4 right now. Now this is, this is Dr. Mansoub's critical edition. This is Osman Yahya's. This is the handwritten manuscript, and this is the Bulaq edition. There's not a whole lot of difference, but one of the things that you might notice is that when you have the kind of Arabic that they're writing, they're not really pointing a lot. So wujud this is a J, but the dot is missing there. And often the fa and qaf are unidentified. Waw, fa, and qaf. So you really have to know what the word is in a sense before, and you type it into Arabic like this. Just some examples. Now, I'll be arguing in a little bit that the way to start the futuhat is to start with chapter 1, and not with the prefatory material. The prefatory material, like the khutbah, was written after the fact, and in fact, at the end of his preface, at the end of his introduction, he says, well, I'll go into it. But just to start with this. So this is the first line of the futuhat, and alhamdulillah, from the beginning, we have to understand what he means. When he says that hamd belongs to Allah, he says that tasbih bihamdihi is that you celebrate God with his celebration and his praise. And for Ibn Arabi, there is no, that we cannot create praise. And he always points to the dua of the Prophet. He says, you give me the names for which I can praise you with, because I don't have the ability to praise. And that's the recognition that Allah's praise is what we enter into. And then so this alhamdulillah, even from the beginning, we have to understand that this is not simply a formula. This is a position saying praise belongs to Allah in the sense that the only praise that we have access to, and which is praise, is the one that belongs to Allah. Alladhi awjada, so the one who, and this awjada is the 4th form of wajada, and so wajada is to find, be found. And so awjada is to make found. We can say create, but perhaps better make found. So the hamd belongs to Allah, the one who makes found al-ashya, the things, and the things from adami wa adamihi. Now, if you look at this, I think some of you may understand already what the difficulty is. And the difficulty is, who is this pronoun, this third person pronoun referring to? And I think there are only 2 published translations, and both of them refer that to make that God, the program, the third program to be God, so his void or emptiness. And that's a little bit difficult. I think the ashya, because he said the word thing, this tells us that when he's talking about these 2 adams, these 2 voids or 2 emptinesses, what he's saying is that there is first a void that things leave. And so there is a void before anything is created. There is a void, and something comes out of that void and becomes a thing. And that thing then has left void number 1. Now it's still in void number 2, and void number 2 is non-existence. So it has become a thing, but it has not become an existent thing. It has not been or existed. And then you have when Allah wants something to be, he says to it kun fayakun, be and it becomes. So the key here is that these are things that need to have wujud, have being before they are. So they exist only in the sense of being thing, and then they are removed from that second void into being. And so this movement from, first you need to be a thing, for instance like a pixel on a screen, and then you need to be lit up. And so this imagery is going to go throughout the futuhat. You need to be a pixel, and then you need to be lit up. You need to be full of life. And that wujud, it comes from one place, and there is only one wujud that there is to be given. And so when we get that one wujud, we are all getting the same wujud from the same place. Well, al-tafa, wujuda. And so, now the interesting, this word also gives difficulty, because you have kalma, you have kalima, you have kalimat, and the interesting thing about kalim is that the grammatical understanding of kalim is that it means something that has 3 letters. So this 3 letters then refers us back to kun fayakun, because kun is actually 3 letters. It's written calligraphically as 2, kaf and nun, but inside is a u, the waw. And so the word itself means a word of 3 letters or more. So this word is loaded with the idea of 3 and kun fayakun. This word, shay, is loaded as the thing that is spoken to be, and then it becomes. And we do this so that we would verify for ourselves. And tahqiq and tahaqqa, and this is the idea of we verify for ourselves. And so everywhere, Ibn Arabi, in every page, he is telling us, verify this for yourself, understand this for yourself. And the way we understand what we understand for ourselves is this mystery or secret of the things' newness, their newness and their oldness. So the newness is that it was newly created to be, but the oldness is that it was a thing before wujud, being, came to it. So it has oldness and newness. But even though the things have newness and oldness, that oldness is different from his oldness. So that oldness, that there is an oldness that we have, but it is different from the divine oldness. And so that we, and then back to the first person put it, so that we would stop and halt before this realization that we verify for ourselves on what we are being taught, what we are learning, and what we are knowing and being taught from the sit qadami. And this one also gives translators a difficulty. They usually translate this as his foot. It seems, but the thing is, we need to have the hint that Ibn Arabi would not start his khutbah without mentioning Allah and then Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so this sidqa qadami means the truthful one who was sent before. So qadam is not only a footstep, but it is a thing that is stepped in front, put in front. So the person who is put in front is the Prophet. And that's why we have here then a thankfulness to Allah and a recognition of what we learn from the Prophet. So this is how the first sentence has grammatical difficulties, it has conceptual difficulties, and it can only be understood when you understand the rest of the futuhat, to come back to it to understand it. And that's why I make the argument, we don't start with the prefatory material, we start with chapter 1. In other words, the futuhat is understandable by itself, whereas the preface is only understandable by the futuhat. And so this is how I've translated this. So with the translation and then two footnotes to try to fill in some of the background that needs to be understood for this. And here's where I am right now. These are printouts of the translation after 3 drafts. The Jews are the parts. These parts are at least 16 pages, and often a little bit more. And there are all these Jews have 16 pages, and the Jews, the parts are in the Safar, in the books, 7 of them. And then there are 37 books up to here, and so that's the futuhat makkiya, 1 to 37. The critical edition is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 12 volumes, and I'm in here right now. So for 3 drafts right there, and they make these 2 huge bindings, and they're getting difficult to work with. They're getting pretty heavy. So this is why I say we don't start with the prefatory material. And actually, he says at the end of his introduction, he says that she is like the ilawat, and the ilawat is the load that you add to the camel. And in English, we have the idea of the last straw that broke the camel's back. So it might be the straw that broke the camel's back, but at least, so who wished wrote her here, meaning that when you take when you own a manuscript, you'll copy it, or someone will copy it, so that it can be, you can have one copy and you can propagate the message to the next person. So you may write it here, or you may eliminate it. You can ignore it. And so I'm saying that the prefatory material needs to be an appendix. We start with chapter 1, because chapter 1, he says, the futuhat makkiya, what was opened up for him in Mecca. He was in Mecca, he was doing the tawaf of the Kaaba, and he saw an embodied being who was weaving in and out of the people, sometimes going through them, sometimes people went through him, and he followed this being around, and then the being says, why are you following me? And he says, I want to be, I know who you are. I want to be one of your beautifying scribes. I want to write beautiful things based on you. And so the youth, who is the silent speaker, turns to him and says, if you want this, and you are ready, then follow me, and the moonlight will light my body, and you will see on my body, etched on my body, you will see what you need to know. And Ibn Arabi says, so I lifted his veil, and I observed his embodied etched writing, mastur. The idea of an etching is very interesting. See, when you write with an ink pen or an ink quill, the ink is what you see as a contrast to the paper. When you etch something, there's nothing that's left behind. There's only a surface that's created. So you have an outward surface and an inward surface. So etching, and this is why mastur is also spoken of in the Quran as the way the universe is mastur, is something that is etched into. So etching, in a sense, gives you 2 views of one thing. And so this etched reality, this etched writing that he sees it on his body. Ibn Arabi reads everything that he contained and encompassed of knowledge. And so he said, the first line I read, and the first inner secret of that line I learned, is what I shall now cite in the 2nd chapter. So he is going to now tell us 1, 2, 3, what he saw written on the youth's body. And we need to take this literally. What I've somehow learned to do, or been pushed to do, is to take Ibn Arabi seriously, to take him literally. When he says, I read it from the body of the youth, I don't take that as poetic or as nice poetry or as eloquent. I want to take it seriously and see how far it will take me. And you can be the judge of how far we can take. But this is an example of embodied language. And it's also interesting that our word for light and etched would be photography, the writing of light. So light writing is photography, is what we think of as photography. So we definitely have this concept behind us. Now, what Ibn Arabi says very clearly, a number of things. He says that there are 6 sections to the futuhat makkiya. 6 sections. And at each of these sections, he will always tell us that I did not choose to put the chapters where they are. He says that. And then he says that most authors and composers, they compose their subject matter, and whatever they want to say, they put it in the order that they think will help you understand what they're trying to say. And he says, I am not a writer, I am not a composer, I have no choice in the matter. And so we're understanding that chapter 88 on Sharia, which should have come in chapter 67, actually comes in chapter 88. He recognizes the absurdity of that and says, I did not choose to put it here. So based on all that, I began to ask myself, and we can ask if we divide the body into 6 sections, and we divide the futuhat, the makkiya, into 6 sections, can we take the number of ma'arif, the ma'rifah in each place, or the number of chapters, and ask what proportion of the futuhat are each of these parts, are each of these sections? In the same way, I can ask what proportion of the body is the head? What proportion is the torso, the left arm, the right leg, and the left leg? And giving that, we get some very interesting ideas. I'm still playing around with that a lot, but we end up getting something around 13%, in the sense that this section here is 13% of the futuhat. The head is 13% of the body of a certain kind of human being. Most of us here will have, the head will be 9% of our body's proportion. And children, this size children, will have 15 or 16 or 17% of their body will be their head. So this is called the Lunt Browder. It's a way, if someone says, we have burns on the body, we want to know how much of the body's proportion is covered in first-degree burns, second-degree burns, or whatever degree burns they are. They'll use this Lunt Browder chart. Now, if someone has a head that is 12% or 13% of the body, then they're just adolescents, so 12 years old, 13 years old, 14 years old. So the youth, around 13 years old, walking in front of him, Ibn Arabi is watching, because the youth has said, look at me and I will show you written on my body everything you need to know. He's watching, he's looking, and he's following him in tawaf. He reads the head, he reads the arms, he reads the torso, he reads the legs. And at the end, he's got what he needs to get. And the way, these are the 560 chapter headings. I just went to my own translation and pulled out all of the chapter headings. These are all the chapters, 560 chapters developed. And so how did he memorize this? How could he remember this? There's someone right now in the Guinness Book of Records, you give him a few decks of cards and randomly do that, and he'll be able to recite to you what cards were coming, 3 decks randomly. The Queen of Spades, then the 7 of Diamonds, the 8 of Clubs, the Joker. He can go on and on like that. How do you memorize this kind of thing? It's called a memory palace technique. You might have probably heard that. The memory palace technique. It was a big thing sort of in the old days. The American Phrenological Journal had an idea. But the memory palace is where you would take something that's very familiar with you, like going through your house or your commute to work, and you would, every place along that trip, you would put the 7 of Clubs here, the 8 of Hearts here, the Queen of Spades here, and then you would walk yourself through that, and that's how you could memorize great gobs of knowledge that might be not connected. And what happens with Ibn Arabi is that when you're reading him and he says, this thing here, I'm going to talk more about this in chapter 190. And you look at 190, it's not there. But it is there in 230, chapter 230. So as he's going through the futuhat and reading it, and people are writing it for him, or he's writing it, he doesn't know what chapter 190 looks like. He can only talk to you about 190 when he gets there. And the same way, if you're in a memory palace, you can always tell people, I'm going this way, this is what I'm remembering. If someone says, what's over here? You say, I don't know, I have to get there first. You have to get there first. He often tells, this is the strange or the funny idea, is he tells us every story twice. And he won't know that he told the story 100 pages ago or 1,000 pages ago. But as a translator, I say, yeah, I've heard that story. He said that. And he does not seem to be aware that he told the story already. Because what prompted that story was when he got there. And so exactly where I am right now in the 11th book, it's he's talking about the number of the awliya, of the saints, and how many there are, and how many siddiqeen there are, and how many sabirin there are, and how many mu'mineen and mu'minat, and all the different kinds of awliya, how many there are. And then at the end of that, he says, and now we're going to talk about Hakim al-Tirmidhi, who has 144 questions that he asks to see if you know what you're talking about. So people who make claims about Sufism, they're challenged by Hakim al-Tirmidhi to answer these 144 questions. Now the reason he talks about that now is because the first question of Hakim al-Tirmidhi in his 144 questions is, how many awliya are there? So because he's talking about numbers, he says, oh yeah, Hakim al-Tirmidhi had this thing called how many awliya are there. Now we will do 144 questions of Hakim al-Tirmidhi. And then at the end of that, he'll know the next thing that comes after that. But he can't tell you now, 5 pages later or 20 pages later, I'm going to do this. He doesn't know yet, because this is how he's understood this thing. Okay. And so the other way, now that's sort of to understand, to take him seriously, to understand how he, in a sense, physically or sort of prosaically, how he did this thing called the futuhat, which is 10,000 pages, how he put together 560 chapters and all these ma'arif, all these marifas that go one after the other. The other thing to understand is that this is a vision. So he saw something and he's describing what he saw. Now when he describes what he saw, he doesn't always know that if there's a system behind it. So now let's say that I come up to you and I say, I've got a system. It's like, let's play a game. I've got a pattern. B, C, D times a number equals that number. And A, E, I, O, U times any number equals 0. And I'll say, this is my challenge to you. What is that? And you'll say, oh, I understand what he's getting at. Every time you have a consonant, that's like 1. So 1 times any number is that number. And anytime he has a vowel, A, E, I, O, U, he's really saying 0. So because 0 times any number is 0. And then if I start telling you that, oh, and that's not all, there's also a thing called the Y. The Y has 2 different values. And isn't that interesting? And you'll say, well, of course Y has 2 different values, because Y can be a consonant and Y can be a vowel. So of course it would have 2 different values. So if I were to say, this is what I saw, you would be able to say, I understand your vision because I understand that you have a system. Whether I understand that system or not, you can see that system. And when it comes to mathematics, Ibn Arabi is not a mathematician. He doesn't have a mathematician's mind. He doesn't have a physicist's mind. He doesn't have a scientific mind. He has a vision, and so he tells us what this vision is. But we can say, wow, he just described a triangle. He just described a square or a circle. We can put on to that and understand that that vision is underlying that vision a structure that we can identify. Now, some of the times that we identify this structure, we may have to come to the 19th century and get what's called Clifford geometric algebra, which is a very interesting way of understanding how vectors work as opposed to just arithmetic. So we'll look at that. We'll start looking at that right now. The other thing we have to understand is that he's describing non-Euclidean geometries. He's describing triangles that don't work like Euclidean triangles. He's talking about higher dimensions and fractal space. He's talking about spaces, prime spaces and fractal spaces. Now, prime numbers, the distance between prime numbers is not predictable. We can never, there's no algorithm that can tell us that if this is a prime number, the next prime number will be right there. And in fact, the job of the last 100 years, starting with Riemann, is the challenge to mathematicians. Can you find a way to either prove that that prime numbers have no predictable distance between them, or can you prove that there will never be found any algorithm that can show how prime numbers are different? Now, if I have an interval 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it begins possible to predict. If I walk from 2 to 3, you can say that 4 will be the next thing that I'll hit. And if I'm walking at a certain rate, you'll say you'll get to number 4 in 2 seconds. So it's a very predictable reality if space has evenly spaced numbers or points in it. But if space does not have evenly spaced points in it, if it's either a fractal or a prime number, then you won't ever know what comes next. The next step may be 3 spots, or it may be 6 spots, or 100 spots. We don't know what the next spot will be. And so prime numbers and fractal spaces are ways of describing things that Ibn Arabi describes partly as ma'lum, things that are known. So the only thing that happens in the world is the ma'lum, things Allah knows is going to happen. That's what happens. And there's no predicting what's going to happen next. So he enters into a new space. This space is also where A and B is not the same distance as B to A. So A to B is not the same distance as B to A. Now, mathematicians in the last, maybe 20 years have been very interested in that question, and the way they use it is what we saw just today as we were driving in. What's the distance between the Holland Tunnel and Riverside Drive? Well, at 5 o'clock on Friday, this distance is not the same as that distance. It depends on which way you're going. And that space is called Hausdorff space, and the Hausdorff dimensions are spaces which things that look like they're the same distance apart are not the same distance apart. This way is not the same as this way. There's also the new creation with every breath, which is you can look at all civilizations, and I think you'll find that this becomes archetypical. That there are people who say that there is one creation, and it's general, predictable, and it's linear. And others will say that there's many creations and they're never the same and they never repeat and there's no linear. So, and this you find from the Greeks, from Indian, China, everywhere will have this kind of break. So we'll look at that for a minute. And then the idea of the week, why the week is so important with Ibn Arabi. Now, when I say take Ibn Arabi seriously, that means that when he says something, instead of saying, oh, this is poetic, or this is nice, or this is lovely, I halt and I stop and say, what is he saying? Can I see what he's seeing? Can I take him literally and understand what he's saying? And he has this one sentence up here. He talks about bread and water and all foods and drinks, clothes and seats. There's a hard way to make a translation. Things you sit on, like saddles. He's kind of saying like saddles and seats. There are fine spirits which are strange, who are the secret of your life, your knowledge, and your praise of your Lord, and raising your station in the presence of seeing your Creator. These spirits have a sacred trust to these physical forms, us, which they fulfill to this soul consigned in a blurry fashion. And so blurry fashion, the shabaha, means that when Ibn Arabi looks at you, he sees that you have a blur around you. You have things around you. You are a blur. There's not a sharp delineation between you and the environment. It's a blur. And then he says, do you see some of them, how they carry out their trust to you, the secret of life? When they carry out their trust, they expel, either from the direction it came in, and it is called burping and vomiting, or from another direction, it's called defecation and urination. Now, when you read that, we can say, 3 years ago, we could say, all right, Ibn Arabi's writing something poetic. As of 2010, if we're reading English or European languages, we understand that biologists are talking about these are microorganisms, that gut flora, gut bacteria, determine how you feel. They determine whether you're depressed or whether you're happy. They determine whether you get fat or by eating a little bit, or whether you get skinny no matter how much you eat. All of these things are determined by gut flora. It determines your emotions, how you feel about things, how you feel, if you have a good feeling about the world or not. This is determined by gut flora. So we need to be able to pull this into whatever we know about microorganisms, about gut flora. And the idea of burping and vomiting. So when you eat something or drink something that's poisonous, it's bad, your body recognizes that it's bad and then will vomit it out and gets it out. And then if it gets down there far enough, it's sitting there and stewing and you're burping and you're having all sorts of gases. And if it's good for you, it's digested and it comes out one of two ways, or both ways, and this is because it's been digested. And so they understand what you do. And then the moment you begin to get to be friendly with your friends down here who have a sick, let's not kill them with antibiotics. They're trying to do their amanah to us, their sacred trust to us, and we're trying to kill them with antibiotics. But when you get to understand them, there are times when I can see a food or something, and already I can feel that this is something that they don't want to have, and there's something wrong with them. And I'll get closer to, whoa, yeah, that is bad. But they can tell from a long distance what is good for you and what's bad for you. And they have a amanat to us, a sacred trust to us. So if you have antibiotics, bring them back and get them back to where they need to be. There are more of them in our gut than there are human beings on the earth. And so these are very important to us. And then the same biologists who talk about some of this, they say that we can no longer talk about the human being. We have to talk about the suprahuman organism. That we are this collection of flora around us, of bugs around us, and us. All of us is one thing. We are a supraorganism. And the only kind that we are, in a sense, human is before we get out into this world. And the way we get out into this world is as we're leaving the womb, we're picking up all of the good flora that we need to have to survive. And so the first blessing that the mother gives us is to go through the channel and pick up all these things as we go. So if you have a child who wasn't able to pick up those channels, find ways to get these the gut flora to be alive and well and to serve the way they want to serve. So there's some quotes that you can get from journals nowadays, scientific journals about this is how we are. Next. The same situation here, this beautiful story says that the ancient prophets, Ibn Arabi tells us, have a story, and he talks about this green worm, which is inside a rock, inside the foundation, the formation of the earth, far, far below. And that this green little worm says, thank you to Allah for bringing the rizq, his nourishment, every day to him. And he says, and Ibn Arabi says, and he thanks him for giving it in that long distance. And he says, but that long distance, I don't mean the long distance between that green worm and Allah. He means the green worm and the food that Allah brings to him comes from a long way away. So this idea that in the middle of a rock, somewhere far, far below, there's a green worm that is alive and well and thanking God because all this substance comes to him every day. Next. It was just fun to say, they used to say, the geologists were saying, we used to go dig deep, looking for oil and all that. And we go, 2,000 feet, 3,000 feet, 4,000 feet deep, and we bring up these soils, these samples from way down there, thousands of feet down, a mile down, and we'd take it to the lab, and the lab would say, oh, there's bacteria in here. Oh, it must have been, there's the word, it got contaminated as it came from the well to our lab. And they said nobody could believe that they could be alive. And then there was this great one, this was 2 years ago. Scientists find life in the cold and dark under Antarctic life. YouTube has this, it's called a some kind of pteropod, I don't know. There's some little shrimp-like thing dancing, and they had this thing, a 600-foot tube in the ice, and there's this little thing dancing around. It became a YouTube sensation. It was just beautiful. And the juxtaposition between, so when Ibn Arabi talks about that little green worm, he says that he thanks God, and the scientist says, we just never believed that there could be life in such inhospitable position. We thought we know everything about this earth, and we didn't know that, oh my God, who thought we know everything about this earth? But anyway, so the scientists find life in the garden. So when Ibn Arabi was talking about, we take him seriously and say, what is he seeing? He's seeing something, he knows something, and I want to find out what he's talking about. And this is the idea of prime numbers. And we can go somewhat quickly here because we'll get to more. But the idea of, see, when you see this afrad, this afrad and the fard is prime number, but they're also prime people. And for Ibn Arabi, chapter 2 starts out with the letters and the numbers are an ummah, just like the ummah of the animals and the ummah of the dogs and the ummah of the people and the ummah of everything else. And they have their ummah, they have their qutub, they have their autad, their pegs, their pivots, they have all of these things that we have in our ummah, they have in their ummah. So the alif and the lam and the mim, they all live in this community. For Ibn Arabi, this community is very much alive, very personable. They all have gender, and so he talks about she and he with different letters, and sometimes switches because there are times when the gender changes as well. So for Ibn Arabi, the whole world is alive in the most personable sense. And so the same way when he talks about prime, you don't know if he's saying prime numbers, meaning like 3 and 7, or he means prime people. And in a sense, he means both, because the prime people work the way prime numbers is. Now, the definition of prime number divides by 1 and itself only, right? And then the opposite of a prime number is a composite number. Numbers that like 15 has 3 and 5 You can multiply 3 by 5, you can multiply 15 by 1 and 15 by. So prime numbers are ones that have themselves, that are known to themselves and to one, the one. And so this is how prime numbers work, this is how prime people work. Okay? And this idea of prime, we're talking about because these spacings are unpredictable but patterned, then that's how we have the world that we have. And in fact, one of the people who are very interested in primes, Maurice de Saltoy, he makes the point that if the world were not prime, sound waves would all start to get to be the same thing, and all you would hear is one sound, and the sound of the tuba would gradually drown out the rest of the orchestra. You would have predictability, but you'd also have lack of diversity. You have oneness, one thing happening all the time over and over and over again, and nothing more. So primeness is what separates things out, gives them room to be different, and to each be their own one, their own unique thing. And I was talking about Riemann. That this is his big trying to understand how prime numbers work and where they fit. Long, beautiful stories. Next, the prime idea of prime people is Khizr and Musa. So Musa, Moses, all the prophets, while they may be prime numbers themselves, when they are prophets or messengers, they have to be composite. And they have to be composite or the rest of us can't understand them. So if a prophet is 60, then all the 6s understand them, the 10s understand them, the 3s understand them, the 20s understand them. Very accessible. If Khizr is a prime number, he's only understandable by himself and by God. So Khizr says to Moses, Moses, I have knowledge which God taught me and did not teach you. And you have knowledge that God taught you but did not teach me. So Khizr, to be a prime number, is to be, in a sense, alone. Your tasting is only your tasting, and it cannot be shared with anyone else, because no one else shares with you in that knowledge and that teaching. And the other people, of course, is Ali ibn Abi Talib, and he's saying, when he's just sad, saying, here is knowledge manifold. I wish that I could found someone to carry it on, but no one can carry it on because he's one of the prime numbers. Abu Hurairah said something similar. He says that I got from the Prophet 2 sacks. For one of the sacks, I disseminated it to you. And the other sack, if I disseminated it to you, you would cut out this volume. And it's crucial because the volume is this throat. So in other words, Abu Hurairah took this knowledge and put it in his volume, the way a bird will put it in the crawl here in order to give it to the child afterwards. So it's not something that Abu Hurairah digested, because it was up here in the volume. So he said you would cut the throat. So there is a transmission without tasting. He didn't taste the transmission, he just kept it right here. One sack he gave, and the other sack he kept right here in the balloon. And this is about the prime, because this cannot be distributed. And it can't even be digested, because it wasn't his number. Next. Then the literality, how literal this Ibn Arabi is, this is, of course, kun fayakun. It comes here. We were saying that the calligraphy of it is 2, but the letters are 3, kaf, wav, and nun. And this idea here is that when he talks about the process of kun, he's talking about a process which is absolutely consistent biologically, sexually, grammatically, and call it philosophically. So all of these things have to work together. And so he talks about the kun, and the interesting thing here, we get that these 2 letters meet and join, and the word in Arabic for join is the same word for sex. So kaf and nun join in sexual union, and what is between the kaf and the nun is the wav, and the wav is hidden. Now, does everyone understand what's being hidden here? When the man and the woman come together, this is hidden inside. And the thing that is hidden inside is apocryphated, that is, that's cut off grammatically. See, in the grammar, kun has a long U, but in the imperative, kun, the U is hidden. You don't see the U, you only see the 2 letters here. And the word for kaf and nun without vowels is a surd. A surd is something that is still and resting. So it says, just as when the man meets the woman, nothing of the pen is visible to the eye. So the pen is not visible to the eye when the man and the woman meet. His throwing the sperm drop in the womb is hidden because it is a secret, and because of this, the idea of sex is expressed as secret in Arabic. So in the Quran, when it talks about nikah, sir and nikah are interchangeable because sir, secret, and nikah, marriage or sex, sir is a way of describing nikah. So the secret is hidden inside here. And after the throwing, so ilqa, to throw something and cast something and ejaculate, all of these are the same word. After the throwing, the two rest, and they become surd. So when you rest and you become surd, you become sukoon, you become still. And vocalization is movement. So harakat means a vowel, but harakat also means movement. So movement is harakat, and sukoon is sur, is to be still. So after the vocalization ends, the movement ends, the two rest and become sur, and then the pen can hide just as the third letter hides, which is the wav inside two surds. And then he goes on and says, what other interesting words connect with the wav? Grammatically, the wav is called rafa, the ascender, so the wav ascends. And because he is generated by raising rafa, taking the vowel u, and he is the ishbal dama. Ishbal dama is the fullness of a vowel that becomes full. And then after it becomes full and soundful, a pleonasm, it then becomes not so full. And it becomes an illat letter. An illat means a weak letter or a soft letter. So after it has done its vowel work, it then becomes an illat letter. Alif, ya, and wav are called that because of their softness and their soft letter and death. So it is a death, and so in certain morphological situations, this wav becomes dead. So what he has done, you can take 5 different levels, and each level is absolutely true on the grammatical level, the sexual level, the biological level, and the creational philosophical level. All of them work together. And this is the attention he has to these living beings and understanding what they're trying to tell us. Now, I think I might rush a little bit here, but you'll probably know the story of Ibn Rushd. He was the greatest Western philosopher, one of the greatest thinkers, intellects of Western civilization. And he met Ibn Arabi when Ibn Arabi had just come off of a youthful retreat. And the word came out that this boy went into this retreat and came out with great things. So Ibn Rushd found out about that, invited his father to bring him, and he brought Ibn Arabi, and he asked, what did you learn? And so, the whole story, you might know this one, the whole story is that Ibn Rushd looks at him, Ibn Arabi looks at him, and Ibn Rushd says, and then Ibn Arabi says, yes. And so Ibn Rushd is so happy, oh, that's wonderful. And then Ibn Arabi says, and then I knew what he was asking, and so I said, no! And then Ibn Rushd said, he became pale, he sat down, he fell down. And then Ibn Rushd wakes up, gets up and says, let me just try this. So, is what you discovered what the intellect teaches us? And Ibn Arabi says, yes and no. And between the yes and the no, the doves get their necks wrangled off of their bodies and separated. So, no wonder the poor guy got pale. So he is the foil of Ibn Arabi and of Madawi al-Kulum. Now Madawi al-Kulum is what Ibn Arabi says is the spiritual teacher that tells him, right after he talks about Ibn Rushd, he talks about Madawi al-Kulum. Madawi, this is from, in order you have dawa, you have medicine, and kulum is the jarrah, the wound. So the Madawi al-Kulum is the jarrah, the one who is the healer, the one who can heal. So this healer is the one who I would say is a foil for Ibn Rushd, is the opposite of this intellectual ability. Of course, Ibn Rushd is the home of Greek knowledge. This is a picture that someone in Europe wrote of Porphyrio and Ibn Rushd, and Euclidean geometry. So this is sort of the Greek knowledge, the Greek understanding, and Ibn Arabi is going to tell us that this is not the way things go. And in fact, so this is the actual sort of the CV of Ibn Rushd. Quite a lot of good books here. Ibn Arabi says, the second time I saw Ibn Rushd, I saw him in a dream, and I saw him behind a veil, and I thought, this man is he's not seeking what we are seeking. He's not seeking what we are seeking. And he said, I did not see him in this physical world. until he had died in Marrakesh. He was coming to Cordoba, and I was standing on the road with some friends, and we saw his funeral procession coming. And what they had done is they put the books on one side to balance the corpse, the body, on the other side, so the donkey or the mule could be able to balance them. So Ibn Arabi has a friend who says, "Can you behold what is balancing the Imam and his books, his works?" And then Ibn Jubair says, "My son, well have you observed and well have you spoken?" And Ibn Arabi says, "I defined it for me as a caution, or a warning, and a remembrance." So in other words, watch out for the intellect, and watch out for thinking that the intellect is going to tell me something. His own poem was, "This is the Imam, and these are his works. I wish I could know whether his hopes were fulfilled." He said, "I wish I could know whether the weight of that body and the weight of that book gave him what he wanted to have." Now, when we leave Ibn Rushd, we leave Euclidean geometry. We enter into where triangles can have 3 right angles. We enter in a place where parallel lines can meet, and lines from the center point to the circumference may be parallel. So if you take a pizza, you have a center point, you have a circumference, you have these pizza slice segments like this. Now, what if those segment lines are parallel? So Ibn Arabi is saying that Madawi al-Kulum told him that the pizza slice lines are actually parallel. Right? And so he says each section of the circling band confronts what is below, and they're equidistant. One does not exceed the other in any way, even if the first is wide, the next is narrow. So we need to say, if we take this seriously, we don't just take it as words, we say, what is he seeing when he says this? And after the 19th century with William Clifford, we have a picture of what he could have been seeing. This is an example of bands that do not exceed each other, even if the one is narrow and the other is wide, where parallel lines can go from a center point to an outward circumference. And so this is his description. So the value of understanding what he is seeing is that the next time he talks about something, I check it with this and say, indeed, this is what he was describing. And then you, in fact, begin to see that, of course, the next thing he'll say is this, because what we know of a Clifford torus is that these are other properties that will come out, and indeed he will then talk about these next properties. His strange math, he says, 1 times 1 does not always equal 1. Aleph times Aleph does not equal Aleph. And he has this idea of the new and the old, and that when the new strikes the old, that you can't find the new anymore, you see the old. When the old strikes the new, you can't see the old anymore, you only see the new. Now this is saying that 2 times 3 is 6, but 3 times 2 is not 6. In other words, it's not commutative, it's non-commutative. And the reason that the way we understand how to handle this is that he's told us that letters are not scalar or not unidimensional. They're actually 2- and 3-dimensional. So letters are actually vectors or bivectors. And when vectors are multiplied, they do different things. And one of the ways that, so if I take this vector, and I take this vector, I put the 2 tails together, and I pull the 2 vectors along, and I get this plane. I get this plane that created from these 2 vectors that I've just multiplied. But if I want to take, if this is b and I want to do negative b, I need to put the negative b tail to tail. So how do I put the tail to tail? The tail goes together, and the rest of the vector is no longer visible. And that vector slides its way around that way. And it's very much as if I have a screen here. You take the second vector, you put it through, and you multiply it this way. And lo and behold, you only see the one vector on top. So he says that when the Khalifa is made, when Allah says, I'm going to make a Khalifa, and all the angels start complaining, he says, well, I'm going to make this Khalifa. And what happens is that when the old hits the new, so the old is going to hit the new, and the old will be invisible and will slide inside, behind the screen, and all that will be visible will be the new. And so that when Adam is created as a Khalifa, the old part of him, the divine part of him, has slid behind him. And all we now see is the new part, the Adam part. Now, Junaid was standing around and someone sneezed, and someone said, Alhamdulillah, and someone else said, Rabbil Alameen. Now, Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen has mixed the old with the new, because the Rabb is old, but the Alameen is new. And so this person complained and said, how can you mix the old and the new? And Junaid says, well, when the new hits the old, the new, that is us, vanishes completely, and all you see is the old. So Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, the Alameen slides in here, all we see is Rabb. And so this is how the contradistinction takes place. So these are non-commutative. So depending on which one hits the other one, brings you what comes out first. Next. And this is and in vector symbols, you know, AB gives you a dot product and a wedge product, gives you a dot product and a wedge product, which is sliding in, cannot be seen. Next. And of course, the Mubia strip is a good way of understanding how something goes around twice to get to where it started from. Because it can fold in, and so it has to go this way and then multiply again before it can be then visible. And when it's visible, the other one is invisible. So when the red is visible, the yellow is not visible, and the yellow is visible, red, and it has to go around twice before you say the same thing twice. So the Mobius strip is an example of a two-dimensional surface which displays a higher dimensional quality. This concept of displaying a higher dimensional quality is that when Ibn Arabi talks about shukr, there's one of the examples he gives that every time, see, when you thank someone, that person gives you more. And when I was a kid, before we had, you know, the stereotypes about Arabs now, that we talked about the hospitality of the Bedouin and the Arab. And you would be told that someone would go to this Bedouin's tent and you would say, oh, how beautiful that rug is. And then they would give you that rug and you would say, oh. So because that generosity means that when you thank someone, they give you more. So who is more generous than us? When we thank Allah, Allah intensely is thankful to us and gives us more. And so this giving more is the product of this thankfulness. So when the Prophet was given the verse that I have forgiven you what came before and what will come afterwards, he spent the rest of the night upstanding, and his feet became swollen. And he stayed up, and people asked him, why are you standing up and your feet are swollen? And he says, am I not a thankful creature? Am I not a thankful creature? And his thankfulness was, every time he's thankful, though, Allah gives him more. But this more, he was not thankful in order to have more, and so therefore something else happened, and it went off into another place. And in this other realm, a thankful being was created. So every thankfulness went from the Prophet ﷺ to Allah, and then that more created this being, and then the thankfulness more, the being gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So his thankfulness created this thankful being in another realm. And this thankful being in another realm is in there reminding Allah that I am here because I am thankfulness, and you are giving more because of this thankfulness. And so every move that we make has its consequences in that other realm. You can think of it orthogonally or 90-degree angle to where we are now. There's another realm in which all of our actions have meaning. And meaning for Ibn Arabi is a place. It's not an ideal or an abstract. It's a place. And that place of meaning, when the widow gives a mite, gives a penny in charity, why is that charity so much greater than the rich man's charity? Well, because the meaning of that charity only is understood in that other realm. Yeah, there's the next slide. And so that idea you can think of the iceberg. We have the tip of iceberg and the ball. We are in the tip, and we think that, oh, that sadaqah was $2 or $10, and the value is that. No, the value is what happens in the bulk of the iceberg that we can't see. And this value, therefore, is the thing that we find out only when we enter that realm. And so actions, every action that we do has its consequences there. And so amal is through niyat. And intention is what tells us that niyat is going to create this amal, which is going to have a life that lives forever in this other realm. And so, when we die, a form will come to us. If that form is handsome, it's our good deeds. If that form is ugly, it's our bad deeds. So we'll see them coming to us. They're embodied beings who live permanently in that other realm. We see them when we die. When you're in your dream, you don't interpret your dream until you wake up. So when you're in the middle of the dream, you're not saying, I'm having a dream, I'm interpreting it. You know, you have your dream because you're in the middle of the dream. When you wake up, you say, oh, I had a dream, and it means this and that and that. Now, our life is the same way. We are in a dream. We will wake up when we die. And when we wake up and die, we will then say, this is what my life meant. So the widow's mite, its value, that penny, will only be known when we die and see what the value of that penny was. And so all of our life, that we are all the things that we are generating, we're generating into another realm, and those are embodied beings in that other realm which are being created by all of our actions. We will only see them when we die. So that's why we want to die before you die, because then you will be in a dream, meaning this dunya, and you will see the meaning of what you've done and what you are doing. And that is to die before you die, to see your dream and interpret your dream, which is this life. One of the